Hello and welcome to DOZ Monologues, hosted by Eturuvie Erebor. DOZ Monologues, also known as DOZ Chronicles Audio Stories, aims to educate, inspire, and drive societal change. All stories are written and narrated by Eturuvie Erebor, and all rights are reserved, including the right of reproduction in whole or in part in any form. This is episode 4, titled Boma. If you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe, like, and share. Thank you. Boma. Welcome home, Mama, I said, closing the book I was reading and putting it aside as my mother entered the bedroom I shared with my 4 younger siblings and joined me on the mattress. I had heard her come in moments ago from the market, but I was studying, so I didn't go out to welcome her. However, my younger siblings were outside, and I heard them welcome her, knew they had helped her with whatever items she had brought home, and given her a cup of water to drink. She was lenient with me since I gained admission to the university, a feat she did not take lightly as she had not achieved it herself, and neither had my late father. As the days drew closer to my first semester exams, she allowed me to take all the time I needed to study. "How are your studies, Boma?" she asked as she adjusted herself so she could sit comfortably. "I am making good progress, Mama." "Thank God," she said. "I know you will continue to make me proud, my lawyer." I smiled. How could I tell her that I was only a first-year law student and still a long way from being her lawyer? I looked at her and instantly noticed signs of her weariness and aging. This saddened me, especially as she was still a very young woman. She had given birth to me when she was 18, the same age I currently was. But life had not been kind to her, or easy for her. No, not with 5 children. She had worked hard to ensure we had the basics, all 5 of us. I was the oldest, and although she never said anything, I knew she had a lot of faith in me, believing I could make her life better. My father had died 2 years ago. Not that it mattered anyway. Even when he was alive, my mother had been the sole provider, working tirelessly to provide for us, including my father. He had been good for nothing, unless being jobless, drinking, and womanizing counted for something. I couldn't say that I missed him, and I was glad he was gone. At least now, Mama no longer had to hide her money with me, for fear that he would steal it and go to spend it on women and drinks. "I want to talk to you, Boma," Mama said, suddenly sounding and looking serious. A frown creased my forehead. What could Mama possibly want to talk to me about? Had something happened while she was at the market? "I am listening, Mama," I said quietly, turning to face her so she knew she had my full attention. "I returned from the market today with a large amount of food items," she told me, causing my brows to crease even further. I couldn't remember her bringing home a large amount of food items before. Mama usually bought foodstuffs in small quantities because that was what we could afford. She was a farmer who worked with her parents on parcels of land given to them by the community, for which they paid rent. She worked very hard on her farm daily, rising early in the morning before the sun came up, and then she moved to the market, where she had a small stall to sell her items. To increase her wealth, she also traveled to the village markets and bought foodstuffs cheaply, bringing them back to resell in the city. It was how she had supported us for many years. I wanted to ask about the extensive shopping she had done, but I thought it was best to wait for her to tell me. After all, she had sought me out to talk. I had been her confidant for many years. As her first child, she had begun to confide in me and tell me about her life and the difficulties she experienced with my father from when I was about 9 years of age. I was more like a younger sister to my mother than a daughter. She took the edge of her blouse and wiped her face, even as she sighed deeply. I wondered if she wiped her face because tears were in her eyes, and I couldn't help but notice that her deep sigh was filled with melancholy. That kind that came after an introspection, a deep introspection. I saw an old friend today, she told me. Oh, I said, wondering what to make of the information and waiting to hear what more she had to say. I also wondered if the old friend was connected to the extensive shopping she had done. Her name is Pere. It means wealth. We grew up in this slum together many years ago, but she is a rich woman now. She has lived up to the meaning of her name. I watched my mother and saw the tears fill her eyes. I looked away and adjusted my position so I wasn't facing her as I waited for her to continue her story. I did not want to see her tears as they broke my heart. All her life she had lived in the slum of Mile 1, Port Harcourt, characterized by its high population density and underdeveloped infrastructure. The slum, where houses were made of plywood and zinc, where the taps did not run, and where the toilets were pit latrines located outside and shared by the community. My mother had been born and raised in the slum, just as her parents had been before her. Although she had always hoped to leave someday, it had never happened. She didn't make enough money to afford to live elsewhere, and with a husband who not only failed to support her in feeding and educating 5 children, but also stole her money, escaping the slum was a pipe dream. Pere came to the market to buy foodstuffs for her home. I did not realize. I was in my shop when a young lady, whom I later learned was Pere's housemaid, came in and bought several items in large quantities. I offered to carry them to the car for her. When I got to the car, a woman was sitting in the driver's seat, taking shelter in the air-conditioned car from the scorching sun. She was lovely, with light skin, and had on sunglasses. She didn't look familiar, and I wasn't expecting to know a woman who drove such an expensive-looking vehicle. I smiled at her as I realized she must be the owner of the goods being bought, and I moved to the boot of the car to drop off the items. Suddenly, she opened the door and stepped out of the vehicle. As I closed the boot and turned to leave, she took off her glasses and called out, "Ibinabo." I was surprised, wondering how a woman of that caliber knew my name. Then she took a step closer and said, "It's me, Pere." I can't tell you how I felt, looking at my childhood friend living a life that was better than mine and out of my reach. Please make no mistake, I was happy to see her, as I had not seen her in years. We lost touch more than 10 years ago when she moved her parents out of the slum. After that, she had no more reason to come this way. But apart from being happy to see her, I was also ashamed of myself and my life. We sat in her air-conditioned car for a long time as we talked. Her life has changed. Like me, Pere came from nothing. But she is not only a millionaire, she is also a millionaire's wife. "How is that possible, Mama?" I asked, curious to know how this woman had managed to make it. How did one go from being born and raised in the slum to being a millionaire and the wife of a millionaire? Boma, my daughter, I too was curious to know and asked her the same question. How had she done it? And as she shared her story, I was filled with regret. I remember thinking, this could have been me if I had been wiser. I couldn't miss the remorse in my mother's voice. It wasn't the first time her voice was laced with remorse when she spoke. Every time she talked about her life, her voice was laced with remorse. But this remorse was more profound, felt more bitter, and I wanted to comfort her. I reached out a hand and squeezed her knee gently as she continued her story. Pere and I were best friends and inseparable during our growing up years. We both had big dreams. I remember that when we walked to school or went to the farm or the market, we would point at the big cars as they drove by and say, "One day we will own cars like that." Even the big houses, we wanted those too. We discussed having housemaids like the rich women and doing no housework. At school we were both brilliant, and it wasn't surprising because we studied together all the time. We began to drift apart when we entered our final year of secondary school. It wasn't that we quarreled, but I met a young man, Cheesy, your father. Cheesy was about 3 years older than me and had dropped out of secondary school. He had not passed his secondary school certificate exams and had no ambition to further his education. When I look back now, I don't know what kind of life I expected to make with such a man. Cheesy was very handsome, which is probably why I gave him attention. He was popular in the slum, especially amongst the young girls, and he and a few friends would call out to us when we were on our way to school or returning home from school. Pere detested him and all other young men in the slum. She couldn't be caught dead talking to any of them. Whenever I stopped to speak to Cheesy, she wouldn't wait. She would keep walking. She told me she had no time for boys in the slum. I thought she was a snob, but in hindsight, I can see that she was acting in line with her dream of leaving the slum. Unlike me, she was wise enough to know that a man in the slum, a man who was failing in the slum, couldn't take her out of the slum. While I can understand her motivations now, at the time I didn't. At some point I even thought she was jealous because Cheesy liked me and not her, and he was better looking than the other guys who called out to us as we walked to and from school. Also, Cheesy appeared to have money. He worked as a bricklayer on various construction sites in the city, and since he was paid daily, he always had cash in hand. He would give me a little money whenever we met up on the streets, and on weekends, he would take me out to have some pepper soup and drinks. As I began to hang out with him, I stopped being available for study time with Pere, and we drifted apart. When we wrote our senior school exams, I didn't do well, but it didn't matter as I was already pregnant and had moved in with Cheesy, and my school days had come to an end. I told myself that once I had my baby, I would return to school. My mother promised to help me with the baby, but it never happened, and from one baby I soon had 5. Pere, on the other hand, did excellently well and went on to a good private university in Lagos. Her result was so outstanding that she received a scholarship to attend a school where only the wealthy could afford to send their children. While at university, Pere began to socialize with her wealthy friends and came home less frequently, especially as she secured work close to her university and spent most of her holidays working. By this time, I relied on her parents, who were still living in the slum, to give me news about her. But even her parents I tried to avoid, as I was discontented with how my life had turned out. Then Pere finished university, and because she had done so well, she got a scholarship to go abroad to do her master's degree. The scholarship was given to her by a wealthy man whose son she had met in university. The son liked Pere and wanted her to accompany him as he was going abroad for his master's. The father saw her results and thought she was intelligent and worth the gesture. While she was abroad, she and the young man began dating and became engaged to each other. Their masters lasted 2 years, and when they returned to Nigeria, they were married. But before they returned from America, Pere's parents were moved out of the slum to a better home befitting the in-laws of a rich man. It was at this point that I lost all means to contact Pere. Pere and her husband initially worked and lived in Lagos after returning from America. Still, last year, they moved to Port Harcourt when her father-in-law handed over one of his companies in the city to her husband to manage. At the same time, she was appointed to the board of a government parastatal, thanks to her father-in-law's connections with the government. Boma, when I saw my childhood friend today, driving the kind of car she once said she would drive, and when she showed me pictures of her home and children, I almost burst into tears. Pere once had nothing like me. I knew where I had missed it, but I had to ask her anyway. I wasn't too proud to ask her. She had made it out of the slum and out of the life of poverty we were both born into, and I hadn't. Therefore, it was necessary to ask her where I had gone wrong. She said to me, "Ibinabo, my dear sister and friend, when we talked about driving big cars and living in big houses, I knew the type of man who would make it possible for me to have those things. And I knew that type of man was outside the slum, and the only way for him to see me was for me to put myself in his environment. I concluded that this environment could only be accessed through education, since I had no money. So I didn't play with my books. I told myself that anyone who wasn't going to help me do better academically wasn't going to be my friend. When you met Cheesy, you initially thought something was wrong with me because of how I snubbed him. But I had to snub him. He wasn't going to school. He was a dropout, which meant he and the friends he moved with couldn't improve my academic performance. And since they couldn't do that, there was no need for me to waste my time with them. When she was done, my mind went back down memory lane. I remembered how I had foolishly become involved with Cheesy, listening to his sweet words of love, drinking pepper soup with him in the local bar, thinking I was living it up, when in reality, I was just a local champion. Instead of facing my studies, I focused on the paltry sums of money he was giving me, which got to my head and made me think I had made it. Even my parents thought I had made it because I was able to support them by bringing home a little money now and then to supplement their income. Instead of focusing on my dreams, I let myself get carried away with Cheesy, fighting every woman who came close, and I was happy when I got pregnant and he asked me to move in. I thought I had won. I thought my life was made. Then when you were born, it didn't take long before things changed. I realized that Cheesy was a lazy man without ambition. The same way he had dropped out of school, he dropped out of work and went long weeks without working. And when he worked, there were many girls in the slum to take out for pepper soup and drinks, and little or no money reached me at home, even though I had a baby to care for. When I complained, he beat me up. It quickly dawned on me that if I didn't want my child to go hungry, I had to go and find something to do. I went farming with my parents and bought food items from the village markets to sell in the city. That's how I started my business, and through the years, as I had your younger siblings, I continued to work through pregnancy, in most cases going from the farm or market to the hospital to give birth, and returning a month later with the baby strapped to my back if my mother was unable to help. Cheesy was of no use to me, and during our time together, he would sometimes be away for weeks, staying at one woman's house or another. Once, many years ago, I traced him to a woman's house and got the beating of my life, and after that, I decided not to try again, but to sit at home with my children and look after them. When he died, I felt nothing at all. But I cannot blame him as much as I would like to. This life I have now, I may not have wanted, but through my actions, I chose it. When I saw my friend, I realized how much damage I had done to my life. When my mother was done speaking, I sat in silence, watching her. Once again, she lifted the edge of her blouse and wiped her face. I knew she had wiped tears. Tears of sorrow. Tears of regret. Her life had been wasted, and for that reason, she wept. Pere was very kind to me, Mama continued. She gave me a huge cash sum and also a check, which I will go and pay into my account tomorrow. The check money is good, and I can use it to expand my business as I always wanted. Maybe we can find a cheap place to rent outside the slum once the business begins to yield a profit. I used the cash she gave me to buy the foodstuffs I brought home. I nodded. I am happy to hear that your friend was kind to you, Mama, I said. You are a good mother and deserve every kindness you can get. Whatever your plans are, my siblings and I will work very hard to help you build a profitable business. The only help I want is for you to excel in your studies, Mama said. I couldn't become like Pere, but you can, Boma. I have shared this story with you today so that when the boys in the slum begin to come for you, you remember that you are following in Pere's footsteps and not mine. I smiled faintly. Yes, Mama, I said. I will remember and I won't fail you. I meant every word. Pere's story had greatly inspired me, and I know Mama had been inspired too. Something happened to her during that meeting with her childhood friend, who was living the dream that had once been theirs. And without a never-do-well husband in her way, Mama became focused on succeeding in her business. Early the following day, she went to the bank, paid the check into her account, and immediately went to work expanding her business venture. 2 years later, she has grown her business into a venture that she is extremely proud of. Her friend Pere has been supportive, and Mama has been able to go to her for advice. With Pere's advice, she broke away from her parents' farm, leased a larger parcel of land to grow a wide variety of crops, and began to properly package the farm's produce for sale in large quantities to those who export African foods. She also established a restaurant that purchases her farm's produce. Mama employed a few women who work with her, and this has enabled her to do more and produce more without feeling overwhelmed. She moved us out of the slum to a 3-bedroom house in a more decent neighborhood and bought a van which she uses for her business. It is not her dream car, but she is thrilled to own a vehicle. For me, I am grateful each time I think about the day Pere re-entered Mama's life, as that meeting was a divinely orchestrated wake-up call for Mama and a turning point for our family. The end. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of episode 4 of DOZ Monologues. DOZ Monologues will return next week with another episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave your comments and subscribe, like and share if listening on YouTube. To contact me, please visit my website eturuvieerebor.com or email me at eturuvie@eturuvieerebor.com. I invite all story lovers to explore my novels and novellas available on Amazon and Google Books. For audiobook enthusiasts, they are also on Audible. Thank you for listening. I am your favorite storyteller, Eturuvie Erebor, and I'll be here next Friday with another story.